Hi folks, this is Karim Raouf from our IT Visualizer channel. We will continue our Lab the Matrix Labs, the video number 60. We have been discussing in the previous video the following. We are still working with the Purple Knight Active Directory Security Assessment tool, which is a free tool that will generate a report that will discuss the security status of your Active Directory. Okay, so we have stopped the last time at the test or the security indicator, which is called domains with obsolete functional levels. Okay, this is one of the tests from the group of tests called Active Directory Infrastructure Security. So here is focusing on the domain functional level or Active Directory domain functional level and the Active Directory forest functional level. So we all know that these two features is important to identify or to make us know what are the features that will be available in the Active Directory. So the Active Directory is we are adding new features and new functionality to the Active Directory with every operating system issued. For example, Windows Server 2012 R2, the Active Directory have certain features, and then the Active Directory on Windows Server 2016 has another features, or we have added more features. So he is talking about you should have the domain functional level and the security and the forest function level. They should be at the highest or supporting the highest operating system. So for example, let's take one of the good examples to explain that. For example, if you have all of your domain controllers have operating system Windows Server 2016 on it, and you have your Active Directory functional or domain functional level and Active Directory forest function level, you have them set to Windows Server 2012 R2. By doing that, you will not be able to get benefit of the Active Directory new features that are added or that was introduced in the Windows Server 2016. So here we need to make sure that our forest functional level and domain function level, they are to the highest, and they are not supporting obsolete systems. So now we know that Windows Server 2012 R2 is now expired, or we have an end of life for this product. So we should not set our domain functional level or forest function level to this operating system. So we need to change it to a newer one. And the more or the more you set your domain functional level or force function level to the newest operating system from Microsoft, you will get all of the new features of the Active Directory. So let's see, for example, here what is the explanation of Perplexity. But if you have a situation where you have your domain controllers operating systems is newer than the forest functional level or domain functional level, then you have a security issue here. Here he is seeking to see if you have your domain functional level set to Windows Server 2012 R2 or lower, because these are all operating systems that are not supported by Microsoft anymore. This can be an issue because the hacker can take advantage of the Active Directory or the older versions of Active Directory. So it's in his benefit, or the hacker, it's in his benefit not to have the Active Directory prepared, or to add new security features that will make his job more difficult. So he needs older versions of Active Directory so he can hack it easily. So let's see the explanation of the different AI tools. But before that, here he has already say that I have failed this test. Why? Because I am using Windows Server 2025 Purview Edition. This is not recognized by the Purple Knight tool as a working operating system. This is still in the preview phase, so he recognized it as an older version of operating system from Microsoft, especially under 2012 R2. So under 2012 R2 operating system. So now he's saying that I have failed, but it's not a correct result, because I am working with a preview edition of one of the Microsoft operating systems. So it's not recognized by the Purple Knight. So I think maybe in the future, if they have updated this tool, they can, or this test will succeed. Okay, so anyway, let's see the perplexity answer concerning this test and how we can explain it in a real world example.
Answer. In the context of Active Directory, AD, the domain functional level, DFL, is a crucial aspect that determines the features and security capabilities available within an organization's AD environment. When a domain's functional level is set to Windows Server 2012 or lower, it means that the organization is not utilizing the latest security advancements that newer versions of Windows Server provide. Real-world example, Matrix Internal. Imagine a fictional company named Matrix Internal, which operates its IT infrastructure using Active Directory. The IT department has configured their AD to run at a domain functional level of Windows Server 2008. This decision was made years ago and has not been revisited since. Current situation. Security features. By maintaining this older DFL, Matrix Internal is missing out on several security enhancements introduced in later versions of Windows Server, such as improved Kerberos authentication methods, privileged access management, PAM, and enhanced auditing capabilities. Vulnerability to attacks. An attacker with knowledge of AD functional levels could exploit this situation. For instance, they might use techniques like Kerberosing, where they target service accounts to request service tickets, which can then be cracked offline if the accounts have weak passwords. Since Matrix.Internal's DFL does not support the latest security features, these attacks could be more successful. Likelihood of compromise. While having a lower DFL itself is not a direct vulnerability, it creates an environment where attackers can tailor their strategies based on known weaknesses associated with older functional levels. For example, brute force attacks. If Matrix Internal has not implemented strong password policies or account lockout mechanisms, an attacker could easily perform brute force attacks against user accounts, especially targeting those with administrative privileges. Privilege escalation. If a user account is compromised, the attacker could leverage the lack of advanced security features to escalate privileges more easily within the network. For instance, they might find that regular users have local admin rights on certain machines, allowing them to move laterally across the network undetected. Recommended actions. To mitigate these risks and take full advantage of modern security features, Matrix Internal should consider upgrading domain functional level. The IT team should evaluate the current capabilities of their domain controllers and plan an upgrade to at least Windows Server 2016 DFL. This upgrade would enable features such as the AD recycle bin and improved authentication methods. Implementing strong security policies. Alongside upgrading the DFL, it is essential for Matrix Internal to enforce strong password policies, multi-factor authentication, and regular audits of user permissions to minimize potential attack vectors. By proactively addressing these issues, Matrix Internal can significantly enhance its security posture and reduce the likelihood of a successful compromise through outdated Active Directory configurations.
So this is the answer of perplexity. Let's see the answer of ChatGPT o1 preview model, which will break it to a more easily understandable text. Let's see the answer and see what it says exactly.
Let me break this down with a real-world example of Active Directory, AD, within a company environment like an internal AD domain named matrix.internal. What is domain functional level? In Active Directory, the domain functional level refers to the version of Windows Server that the domain controllers, DCs, are running on. This functional level defines which AD features are available in your environment. Higher domain functional levels unlock newer security and management features, while lower levels are tied to older versions of Windows Server and have fewer security options. Example, matrix.internal and domain functional level. Imagine your company, Matrix Corp, has an internal Active Directory domain called matrix.internal. This domain has its domain functional level set to Windows Server 2012. Even though Matrix Corp has some servers running newer Windows Server versions, the domain functional level is still locked at the older Windows Server 2012 version. Why is this important? Newer security features. Newer versions of Windows Server, e.g. 2016, 2019, or 2022, come with advanced security features like Privileged Access Management, PAM, fine-grained password policies, or better support for authentication protocols, e.g. Kerberos improvements. However, if your domain functional level remains set to Windows Server 2012 or lower, you won't be able to leverage these security features. Functional level not automatically upgraded. Even if you upgrade your domain controllers, DCs, to newer Windows Server versions, e.g. Windows Server 2016 or 2019, unless you manually raise the domain functional level, you are still operating with the older security framework. This is like having a modern car, but choosing to use it with outdated safety features. Likelihood of compromise. Although a lower domain functional level, such as Windows Server 2012, does not directly make the system vulnerable, an attacker who knows that your domain is running on an older functional level could exploit this knowledge. They can bypass new security controls. If the newer AD security features are not enabled, attackers can use legacy attack techniques such as exploiting older authentication protocols or weaker password policies. Adjust their attack tactics. For instance, if an attacker understands that matrix.internal is still on Windows Server 2012 functional level, they might use attack methods that were effective against that version, but less effective against newer ones. Recommendation for Matrix Corp. To prevent attackers from exploiting the older security framework of matrix.internal, the IT team should upgrade domain functional level. If the domain controllers, DCs, in matrix.internal are running on a newer Windows Server OS, e.g. 16/2019, Matrix Corp should raise the domain functional level to match the newer OS. This would unlock more advanced security features, such as Protected User Security Group, Advanced Authentication Protocols, Dynamic Access Control. Ensure compatibility. Before upgrading the functional level, the IT team should check if any legacy systems or applications still rely on older AD features. Once compatibility is confirmed, upgrading will increase security. Summary. In short, the domain functional level being set to Windows Server 2012 or lower in a domain like matrix.internal means that you cannot take advantage of newer AD security features. While it's not a direct vulnerability, attackers can use their knowledge of older functional levels to target systems with less security. Therefore, if your domain controllers support newer OS versions, it's best to raise the domain functional level to benefit from stronger, more modern security measures.
This is a good answer. If you go to Cloud 3.5 Sonnet and ask it the same question, let's see what will be the answer.
Copy. Retry. Krone. Let me explain this using a real-world example in the context of Active Directory. Imagine matrix.internal is a medium-sized company that has been using Active Directory for many years. They started with Windows Server 2012 for their domain controllers and haven't upgraded since then. Here's a practical example of what this means. Current situation. At matrix.internal, Their domain functional level is still set to Windows Server 2012. This is like having a house with an old security system that only has basic features. They can use passwords. They have basic group policies. They can do simple user management. Security limitations, because they're stuck on this older functional level. They can't use more advanced security features like privileged access management. They don't have access to newer password protection features. They can't implement more granular security controls. Attacker perspective. Let's say an attacker, Alice, gets into the network and discovers this old domain functional level. She knows the domain won't have certain security features that would make her job harder. She can use older, well-known techniques that might be blocked in newer versions. She might be able to exploit weaknesses that have been fixed in newer versions. Real impact example. In a newer domain functional level, like Windows Server 2016, Matrix.internal could use just-in-time administration where admin rights are only given temporarily. Implement more sophisticated password policies. Have better auditing and monitoring capabilities. Without these, an attacker like Alice might more easily maintain persistent admin access. Have an easier time moving laterally through the network. Face fewer obstacles when attempting privilege escalation. Mitigation. The solution for Matrix.internal would be to upgrade their domain controllers to a newer Windows Server version. Raise the domain functional level. Start using the new security features available. Think of it like upgrading from an old home security system with just door locks to a modern one with cameras, motion sensors, and smartphone integration. The house isn't necessarily unsafe with the old system, but it's missing out on significant security improvements that could make it much harder for intruders to break in.
So this is a good answer. We have seen 3 different answers for the same topic. So now we can go and discuss the next test, which is operators or operator groups no longer protected by admin SD holder and SD prop. We have discussed the admin SD holder and SD prop before. So there is a certain configuration when set, it can make the admin SD holder or specifically SD prop will not protect or will not check important groups in your Active Directory and check their permissions and see if there is something wrong, and they can reset it back. So this is the issue here. We need, or this test is checking if there is this option enabled. If this option is enabled, the SD prop behavior could compromise security, or certain groups can be removed from the protection of the SD prop process. So let's see also an explanation concerning this topic. If we go to Perplexity and ask it to explain this topic, let's see what will be the answer.
Answer. In the context of Active Directory, AD, the admin SD holder is a special object that helps manage permissions for certain privileged groups, such as domain admins and enterprise admins. The DWAdmin SDX mask setting in the DS heuristics attribute can influence how security descriptors are propagated to these groups. Modifying this setting can lead to potential security risks. Real-world example, Matrix.internal. Let's consider the fictional company Matrix.internal, which uses Active Directory to manage its IT infrastructure and user permissions. Current situation. Matrix.internal has a standard AD setup, where the default behavior of the admin SD holder is intact. This means that security descriptors, SDs, for critical groups like domain admins are updated regularly, a process known as SD prop, to ensure they maintain their necessary permissions and protections. However, during a recent audit, the IT department discovered that the DWAdmin SDX mask setting had been altered. This change indicates that certain groups may have been removed from the SD prop protection mechanism, which could compromise security. Implications of the change. Loss of protection. By modifying the DWAdmin SDX mask Matrix.internal might have inadvertently allowed certain groups or accounts to bypass the usual security descriptor protections. This could mean that non-administrative users might gain elevated privileges or access to sensitive resources without proper oversight. Defense evasion. An attacker who gains access to an account with modified permissions could exploit this situation for defense evasion. For example, if an attacker compromises a regular user account and that account is no longer subject to SD-prop protections, they could potentially escalate their privileges without triggering alerts or detection mechanisms that would normally be in place for privileged accounts. Likelihood of compromise. The alteration of the DWAdmin SDX mask setting does not directly indicate a vulnerability, but raises significant concerns about security practices. Increased attack surface. With certain accounts now having fewer restrictions, attackers could more easily manipulate these accounts for malicious purposes. They might use techniques such as privilege escalation or lateral movement within the network. Auditing challenges. If the default behavior is modified, it complicates auditing efforts. The IT team may find it difficult to track changes in permissions or detect unauthorized access attempts since some accounts may not be monitored as closely as they should be. Recommended actions. To address these issues and enhance security at Matrix. Internal. The following actions should be taken. Review and restore default settings. The IT team should investigate why the DWAdmin SDX mask was changed and restore it to its default state. This will ensure that all critical groups continue to receive appropriate protections from SD-prop. Conduct security audits. Regular audits of group memberships and permission settings should be conducted to identify any unauthorized changes or anomalies in user privileges. Implement monitoring solutions. Deploy monitoring tools that can alert administrators to changes in critical settings like DS heuristics or suspicious activity involving privileged accounts. By taking these proactive measures, Matrix Internal can strengthen its Active Directory environment and reduce the risk of security breaches due to misconfigurations related to admin SD holder protections.
So this is the answer of perplexity. If we go to ChatGPT o1, which will give us a more simpler answer, we can now see that there is a pattern for perplexity to be more technical. As for ChatGPT o1, it is a little bit easier. As for Claude 3.5, it's really explaining through analogy or a simple example. So we can see the different AI tools and the different explanation mechanism. If we go there and see the answer of ChatGPT o1, let's read it loudly.
Let me explain this content using a real-world example involving an Active Directory domain named matrix.internal. Understanding the components. What is DS heuristics? DS heuristics is an attribute in Active Directory that allows administrators to modify certain default behaviors of the directory service. It is a string of bits where each position can enable or disable specific features or behaviors within AD. What is DWAdmin SDX mask? DWAdmin SDX mask is a specific setting within the DS heuristics attribute. It is a bit mask used to modify the behavior of the security descriptor propagator SD-prop process concerning specific security groups. By setting bits in this mask, you can exclude certain built-in or custom groups from the protection normally provided by SD-prop. What is SD-prop? Security descriptor propagator. SD-prop is a background process in Active Directory that ensures consistent security descriptors, permissions, across privileged accounts and groups. It works by propagating the permissions from a special object called admin SD holder to all members of protected groups, e.g. domain admins, administrators, every 60 minutes. This mechanism prevents unauthorized changes to permissions on privileged accounts and groups. Real-world example. Matrix.internal. Imagine that in the Matrix.internal domain, an administrator discovers that the DWAdmin SDX mask on DS heuristics has been set. What does this mean? Setting DWAdmin SDX mask modifies the default behavior of the SD-prop process. Certain groups that are normally protected by SD-prop can now be excluded from this protection. This means that any security descriptors, permissions applied to these groups will not be overwritten by SD-prop, allowing custom permissions to persist. Potential security implications. Reduce security for privileged groups. Excluding groups from SD-Prop protection can lead to inconsistent and potentially insecure permissions on privileged accounts. Opportunity for attackers. An attacker with sufficient privileges could modify DAdmin XMask to exclude specific groups, allowing them to maintain unauthorized access without being detected or having their changes reverted by SD-Prop. Defense evasion. Altering SD-Prop behavior is a tactic that can be used to evade standard security measures, making it harder for administrators to detect and remediate malicious changes. Likelihood of compromise. Unusual configuration. Modifying DualAdmin SDXmask is not standard practice and is rarely needed in typical AD environments. Indicator of malicious activity. The presence of a non-default DAdmin SDXmask setting could indicate that someone is attempting to bypass security mechanisms. Risk of persistent threats. Attackers may use this modification to establish persistent access to privileged accounts, making it crucial to investigate any changes to this setting. Recommended actions for matrix.internal. 1. Audit the DSHeuristics attribute. Regularly check the value of DSHeuristics to ensure that DAdmin SDXmask has not been set unexpectedly. Use tools like Active Directory Users and Computers or azedit.nmsc to view and edit the attribute. 2. Maintain default SD-Prop behavior. Unless there is a specific and well-understood need, keep the admin SD holder and SD-Prop behaviors at their defaults. Default settings ensure that privileged groups and accounts remain protected with consistent security descriptors. 3. Monitor for unauthorized changes. Implement alerting for changes to critical attributes like DSHeuristics. Use security information and event management (SIEM) tools to detect and respond to such changes promptly. 4. Educate administrators. Ensure that all administrators understand the importance of SD-Prop and the risks associated with modifying its behavior. Provide training on proper AD management and security practices. Conclusion. In the context of matrix.internal, setting the DAdmin SDXmask mask on DSHeuristics alters the default behavior of the security descriptor propagator, SD-Prop, potentially compromising the security of privileged groups. This modification can allow unauthorized permission changes to persist, providing an avenue for attackers to evade defenses and maintain access. It's crucial to keep the default SD-Prop behavior intact to ensure that all privileged accounts and groups remain consistently protected. By understanding and monitoring these settings, organizations like matrix.internal can better safeguard their Active Directory environments against potential security threats.
As we can see here, the answer is more or better than Perplexity, easier to understand. If we go and ask Claude to explain the same topic, let's see now.
Start new chat. Let me explain this using a practical example from matrix.internal. Imagine matrix.internal is a company with an Active Directory setup where normal security setup, default behavior, think of admin SD holder and SD-Prop like an automatic security guard system for VIP accounts in Active Directory. Every hour, this system checks all administrative accounts like domain admins, enterprise admins. It ensures these accounts have the correct, strict security permissions. If someone accidentally or intentionally changes permissions on these accounts, the system automatically fixes it. Real-world example. Let's say Sarah is an IT admin at matrix.internal. The company has a strict policy that even other IT staff shouldn't have full access to domain admin accounts. If Bob, another IT staff, manually tries to change permissions on a domain admin account, SD-Prop will automatically revert these changes within an hour. Modified behavior, DAdmin SDXmask set now. Imagine someone has modified the DSHeuristics by setting DAdmin SDXmask. This is like telling the security guard system to ignore certain VIP accounts. Some administrative groups can now be removed from this automatic protection. Changes to permissions on these accounts won't be automatically fixed. Real attack scenario. An attacker named Alice has gained some access to matrix.internal's network. She discovers that DAdmin SDXmask has been set. She realizes this means certain admin groups aren't being automatically protected. She can now modify permissions on these accounts without the changes being reverted. This allows her to potentially grant herself or others persistent access to privileged accounts. Remove audit settings from these accounts. Create backdoors that won't be automatically detected and fixed. Example timeline. Day 1. Alice modifies permissions on a protected admin group. Normally, within 60 minutes, SD-Prop would detect and revert these changes. With DWNEX mask set, the changes remain, giving Alice ongoing privileged access. Why this is dangerous. Let's use a physical security analogy. Normal setup. Every hour, a security guard checks that all VIP office doors are locked and alarms are set. Modified setup. DWNEX, some VIP offices are now skipped during these checks. Result. If someone unlocks a door or disables an alarm on these offices, it won't be noticed or fixed. Detection and mitigation at Matrix.internal. The security team should regularly check if DS heuristics has been modified, investigate why and who changed it if it has been altered, reset it to default unless there's a critical business need, monitor for any permission changes on administrative groups, review all administrative group memberships and permissions, real-world recovery steps, reset DS heuristics to default, force an immediate run of the SD-Prop process. Audit all changes made to admin group permissions while protection was disabled. Review security logs for any suspicious activity. Consider changing passwords for affected admin accounts. Remember, like having a security guard skip checking certain executive offices, disabling these automatic protections rarely has a legitimate purpose and often indicates someone trying to maintain unauthorized access to privileged accounts. Copy. Retry.
So this is the answer, and we can see the different explaining techniques. This is the test, and now we know why it is very important to check that. Now we can go to the next test, which is AD Certificate Authority with Web Enrollment. This is a security issue when you are having a certificate server, and to issue a certificate through the certificate server, you can do this through the web enrollment. This is a security issue, especially if you authenticate to the certificate server using NTLM, not Kerberos authentication method. So let's see also a simple explanation from ChatGPT 01 concerning this topic. Here I don't have a certificate server, so I have this test failed or non-available. But we need to know also why it is very, very important. Let's see. First of all, if we go and ask Perplexity, let's get something like this one. Here, for example, we can get this, we get the description, and let's get one moment. Here we can get the description or ask to explain this topic. If we go there like this one and copy and ask Perplexity to explain it. Here you go, and let's go. So here, this is the answer. Let's try to read it loudly.
Answer. Understanding NTLM authentication in Active Directory context. Active Directory AD plays a crucial role in managing permissions and access to resources within a network. One of the authentication protocols used in AD is NT-LAN Manager, NTLM, which has several vulnerabilities, particularly in the context of Active Directory Certificate Services, ADCS. Real-world example, ADCS and NTLM vulnerabilities. Imagine a company named Matrix. Internal, which has implemented ADCS to manage digital certificates for its internal applications. The company uses web enrollment services to allow users to request certificates via a web interface. By default, these services may accept NTLM authentication, which can expose the organization to various security risks. Scenario: potential attack using Petit Bottom. Initial setup: an attacker gains access to the internal network, perhaps through phishing or exploiting a weak device. They discover that the ADCS web enrollment service is configured to accept NTLM authentication. Exploiting vulnerabilities: the attacker uses an exploit known as Petit Bottom. This exploit allows them to relay NTLM credentials from a domain controller, DC, to the ADCS server. Essentially, they trick the DC into authenticating with the ADCS service using its own credentials. Credential relay: once the attacker successfully relays the credentials, they can request a certificate from the ADCS server. This certificate can then be used to gain further access within the network, potentially escalating their privileges to that of a domain admin. Consequences: if successful, the attacker could control critical resources within Matrix. Internal, leading to significant data breaches or operational disruptions. Indicator outcomes: the content describes how an indicator script evaluates the security posture of such services. Past: if an enrollment service is contacted but denies NTLM authentication, this is a positive outcome indicating that the service is secure against unauthorized access. IOE found: if NTLM authentication is available on an enrollment service, it signals a negative security posture as it indicates vulnerability to attacks like Petit Bottom. Fail to run: if the script cannot resolve the address of an enrollment service or if it's unreachable, it does not affect the security posture score, but indicates potential misconfigurations. Mitigation strategies: to protect against such vulnerabilities, organizations like Matrix Internal should consider implementing several mitigation strategies. Disable NTLM authentication. Transitioning away from NTLM in favor of Kerberos can significantly enhance security. Implement extended protection for authentication. EPA: this adds an additional layer of security for services accepting NTLM. Regular audits and configuration reviews. Ensure that all ADCS services are configured correctly and do not accept insecure authentication methods. Monitor for unusual activity. Implement logging and monitoring solutions to detect any unauthorized access attempts or unusual credential usage patterns. Conclusion: the risks associated with NTLM authentication in Active Directory environments are significant, especially when combined with vulnerabilities like Petit Bottom. Organizations must proactively manage their authentication protocols and configurations to safeguard against potential exploits that could lead to severe security breaches.
So as usual, we can see very technical answer and very professional one. If we try to ask ChatGPT or one to explain the same topic, we will see the same pattern of breaking it to simpler terms and terminologies. If we go there and ask it to explain it or read it loudly.
Explanation of the content using a real-world example in the context of Active Directory. Matrix.internal overview. In your Active Directory AD domain, matrix.internal, there is a concern regarding Active Directory Certificate Services, ADCS, and the potential for NTLM authentication being accepted by web enrollment services. This situation could be exploited by attackers to elevate their privileges within the domain. Let's break down explanation of the content using a real-world example in the context of Active Directory. Matrix.internal overview. In your Active Directory AD domain, Matrix.internal, there is a concern regarding Active Directory Certificate Services, ADCS, and the potential for NTLM authentication being accepted by web enrollment services. This situation could be exploited by attackers to elevate their privileges within the domain. Let's break down what
Okay, we think we have a problem with the read, but we can use the auto read or the read feature in just a moment. So now we can read it loudly.
Explanation of the content using a real-world example in the context of Active Directory. Matrix.internal. Overview. In your Active Directory AD domain, matrix.internal, there is a concern regarding Active Directory Certificate Services, ADCS, and the potential for NTLM authentication being accepted by web enrollment services. This situation could be exploited by attackers to elevate their privileges within the domain. Let's break down what this means and how it could impact your environment. Understanding the components. Active Directory Certificate Services, ADCS. ADCS is a Microsoft service that allows you to create and manage digital certificates for your organization. It enables public key infrastructure, PKI, which is essential for secure communications, authentication, and data integrity. Web Enrollment Services is a feature of ADCS that allows users to request and obtain certificates through a web interface, typically accessed via https://NTLM authentication. NTLM, NT LAN Manager, is an older Microsoft authentication protocol that has known security vulnerabilities, particularly susceptible to relay attacks. Kerberos is the default and more secure authentication protocol used in modern Active Directory environments. Accepting NTLM authentication on services like web enrollment can open up security risks. What the indicator does. The described indicator performs the following steps. Enumerates certificate authorities CAs. It searches the enrollment services container in AD to find all CAs configured in your domain. Resolves IP addresses. For each CA found, it resolves the associated server's IP address. Attempts NTLM authentication. It tries to authenticate to the web enrollment service at https:// determines the result. Passed. If NTLM authentication is denied, indicating that the service does not accept NTLM, positive security posture. Indicator of exposure, OE, found. If NTLM authentication is accepted, indicating a potential vulnerability, negative security posture. Fail to run. If the service cannot be reached or the IP cannot be resolved, no impact on security posture score. Note. The indicator currently does not identify extended protection for authentication, EPA, or other mitigations suggested by Microsoft. Real-world example in matrix.internal. Scenario. Your domain, matrix.internal, has an ADCS server named ca01.matrix.internal. CA01 provides web enrollment services for users to request certificates. Indicator execution. Enumeration. The script finds CA01 in the enrollment services container. IP resolution. It resolves CA01 to IP address 192.168.1.100. NTLM authentication attempt. It attempts to authenticate to https://192.168.1.100/certsrv using NTLM. Possible outcomes. Outcome A. NTLM denied, passed. NTLM authentication is denied. The server requires Kerberos or uses EPA. The indicator returns passed. Implication. Good security posture. No immediate action required. Outcome B. NTLM accepted. IOE found. NTLM authentication is accepted. The indicator returns IOE found. Implication: potential vulnerability. Action needed to secure the server. Outcome C: fail to run. The IP cannot be resolved or the service is unreachable. The indicator returns fail to run. Implication: cannot assess vulnerability. May need to check server availability. Likelihood of compromise. Understanding the risk. NTLM relay attacks. Attackers can exploit services that accept NTLM authentication by relaying NTLM credentials to another service, effectively impersonating a user. ADCS web enrollment accepting NTLM can be a target for such attacks. Petit Potem attack. In July 2021, the Petit Potem method was disclosed. It leverages the MSCFSRPC protocol to coerce a server to authenticate to another server via NTLM. When combined with a vulnerable ADCS web enrollment service, attackers can escalate privileges to domain admin. Impact on matrix.internal. If CA01 accepts NTLM authentication, an attacker could use Petit Potem to trick a domain controller or another privileged server into authenticating to CA01. By relaying this authentication, they could request a certificate as a privileged user. This certificate can then be used to access resources as that user, potentially compromising the entire domain. Recommended actions for matrix.internal. 1. Disable NTLM authentication on web enrollment services. Configure ADCS to reject NTLM authentication. Edit the IIS settings on CA01 to disable NTLM. Ensure that only Kerberos authentication is allowed. 2. Implement Extended Protection for Authentication, EPA. Enable EPA in IIS. EPA helps prevent credential relaying by binding the authentication process to the TLS channel. Follow Microsoft's guidelines to configure EPA on your web enrollment services. 3. Apply Microsoft's mitigations. Review Microsoft's security advisories. Microsoft has provided specific mitigations for the Petit Potem attack. Implement system hardening measures, such as disabling unnecessary services and protocols. 4. Update and patch systems. Ensure all servers are up to date. Regularly apply security updates to Windows Server and ADCS. Stay informed about new vulnerabilities and patches. 5. Monitor and audit ADCS configurations. Regularly check for configuration changes. Use monitoring tools to detect if NTLM authentication is re-enabled. Audit logs for any unusual authentication attempts or certificate requests. 6. Educate administrators and users. Provide training on security best practices. Ensure that administrators understand the risks associated with NTLM. Promote awareness about phishing and social engineering attacks that could lead to credential compromise. Conclusion. In the matrix.internal domain, allowing NTLM authentication to ADCS web enrollment services poses a significant security risk. Attackers can exploit this to perform NTLM relay attacks, potentially leading to full domain compromise. By disabling NTLM authentication, implementing EPA, applying patches and mitigations, you can significantly reduce the likelihood of compromise. Additional information. Understanding ESC8. ESC8, Enterprise Security Certification 8, refers to the classification of this vulnerability in ADCS. More details can be found in security research articles and Microsoft's documentation on securing ADCS. Resources. Microsoft Security Advisories. Mitigating NTLM relay attacks on Active Directory certificate services. Petit Potem attack details. Petit Potem GitHub repository. Security best practices. Regularly review and implement security best practices for ADCS and Active Directory. By proactively addressing these issues, Matrix.internal can strengthen its security posture and protect against advanced attacks targeting its infrastructure. ChatGPT.
So this is the answer. If we go to Claude and see its answer, which is a little bit, I think it is good, but let's first see how it is organized. If we go there and see here, he's saying real world scenario matrix.internal setup matrix corporation. Matrix.internal has an ADCS server for issuing certificates. Server name CA01.matrix.internal used for issuing SSL certificates, user certificates, etc. Accessible via web enrollment interface. Okay, the vulnerability is talking about the Petitum vulnerability. He is saying, or he's explaining in a diagram, but actually it's not that good. He's saying attacker, DC as domain controller, ADS, these are the components. Victim as admin workstation. So these are the components of the attack. The admin workstation, the certificate server, the domain controller, the attacker. And of course he will take control over the admin workstation. Then he is initialize an MSEFSRPC connection, okay, to the DC, I think through the admin workstation. Then he will make NTLM authentication to the certificate server. Then he can issue a certificate as a domain admin. So these are the steps, and very good answer, by the way, to explain the attacking method, real attack scenario. So he's giving the steps and then he's giving the real world commands. I think here attacker Alice discovers the ADS. So this is I think here this is a PowerShell command to get the certificate server name. Okay, I think this is maybe a PowerShell script. Then after getting the AD or the certificate server name, now he can authenticate to it. Alice checks if NTLM authentication is accepted also through a PowerShell command to test if the certificate server allows NTLM authentication. So he now knows the certificate server name, then check if he accepts NTLM authentication method. Very good example actually. And then he can begin the attack. If it is accepted, now he can begin his attack. Alex used Petitum to force DC authentication, realize this authentication to ADCS web enrollment, obtain certificate with DC privileges. So in a way or another, this Petitum attack will allow Alice to authenticate to the CS certificate server and issue a certificate. Okay, now this is the way. Invoke Petitum. I don't think this is that good. I think he's hallucination here maybe, because invoke Petitum, this is not, I think this is not a PowerShell command. Okay, so I think this is not correct. Maybe in a way he can do that and then he can invoke or to I think this command is not correct, but anyway the steps are very good to explain how the attack is done. Impact on matrix.internal scenario complete domain compromise. Alice starts with a basic user account, exploits this vulnerability, obtains domain admin privileges for access to all matrix internal resources. So by issuing the certificate now he can work, or it can work. Detection methods for matrix.internal. Check web enrollment authentication. So also a script to check if there is any web enrollment or certificate server web enrollment. Then monitor for suspicious certificate request by a PowerShell command to check the event viewer for events for issuing certificates. And then, okay, I think it's very good example, but I think there is some hallucination maybe concerning this line in specific. Okay, so now if we go and continue, now he's saying how to mediation strategies to disable NTLM authentication, which is how we can do that using PowerShell. You can do this from the IIS setting. Then implement EPA protection for authentication. This is done also, I think, using maybe XML files or something. And then network segmentation. Here is trying to say that you should put your important servers in a separate network segment. For example, here you can see general, we have restricted servers in network segment, and admins are in a network segment, and regular workstations in a network segment. So we have three network segmentation, one for the very restricted access servers, admin workstations to allow access to these servers or this network segment, and to be blocked for the regular workstations. Anyway, I think this is a very, very good example to explain. And then he's giving us some regular auditing scripts or a script to audit test certificate server and check if NTLM is enabled or not, EPA is enabled or not. I think this is a good script. Then implement secure defaults, use Kerberos instead of NTLM, restrict certificate templates, okay. Implement approval process, a manager approval for CS. This is a good way to control the issuing of certificates. Restrict certificate templates, access to certificate templates, and I think web enrollment should be disabled, or if you have web enrollment for certificates, you should use Kerberos for authentication to the certificate server instead of the NTLM. Now recovery steps if compromised: disable web enrollment, reset compromised accounts, revoke suspicious certificates, long-term actions, review and update all certificate templates, implement proper network segmentation, set up enhanced monitoring. Now we can see real-world example of secure. Anyway, I think this is a good explanation for this topic, and I think also we can stop at that point. Now we can see the different AI tools are explaining different topics in very, very simple way, and I think if this answer is correct, this will be the best one from my point of view, that Claude give us this. Let's see if we can see these two lines are good or not. Is this PowerShell command correct? Let's see if so. I think he is saying it looks correct. Looks mostly correct for simulating an attack using the Petitum and Entable. However, there are a few things. Invoke Petitum. This command is used to exploit MCP protocol, so and so. Invoke this command. Here is a refined. So he is talking about that this command is correct. So there is a module called invoke Petitum. If we see this and try to copy and search for this command and see if we have it. Let's see if this command is correct or not. So if we have maybe an image or something, we can see this one. Let's see if here. Okay, so we have invoke Petitum, so this is a good one. So now I can surely say that the answer of Claude is the best one. So we have a very professional answer. We can see that we have all of the elements of the perfect answer. We can see that it's giving us the scenario, the vulnerability, how we can do that, or how I can initialize the attack, the methods, the meditation steps. All of these are very, very good explanation from my point of view concerning this topic. So I think Claude has exceeded in this answer. So we will stop at this point, and in the upcoming video we will begin talking about the security indicator GMSA object with all password. Hope this video is informative for you all, and thank you all for viewing. Thank you so much.